Salutations, and welcome to the youth political podcast that is PolitiBabble, where this week it's all about the Commonwealth.
I'm Oliver, and as usual, I'm joined by my wonderful co-host Archibald, as well as today's guest panelist, Jay, but not in person.
Hello, Jay.
Hello, Archie, and Oliver. Pleasure to be here.
It's great to have you here. We're having the joys of when we started and got into the studio today. We discovered that Skype didn't actually have video on the studio PC, nor did it have the microphone set up until we called through Biotic Studio. So we're here. We've made it.
Yep, we are. Yeah.
So we come. I suppose we should introduce you, Jay. So. You're a friend of the podcast, you could say. I think you had me on in your Acta Populi podcast.
I like to think of that as the sister podcast.
The sister podcast of PolitiBabble. Indeed, give it a listen. It is rather good.
I should.
You should, Oliver. You should indeed. So yeah, tell us a bit about yourself.
I'm Jay. I'm in the same year as Archie, though in a different country in England. I live close to Manchester. I'm in year 12. I'm doing history and English literature and music at A-level, and I'm hoping to do history. I have a real interest in the empire in India. That's why I was very keen on talking about imperialism.
Indeed, brilliant. And we do come to, I suppose, the most important question of any podcast, which should, if you're on a podcast and you don't have this question, you should definitely introduce is, if you were a cake, Jay, what cake would you be?
This has been kind of occupying my mind for ever since I watched the new series of this. There's so many questions, and so many people have been saying their cakes, and more as the episodes plow on. I was like, oh my god, that's going to be my cake. There's no cakes left. So I'm reduced to a very small amount of cakes I can choose from. And I chose to go for an obscure one. I chose to get a Battenberg cake.
I love Battenberg cake. They're really nice.
Yeah. And there is no real kind of deep, profound philosophical reason for this. Mainly just because I thought I may as well go for one that hadn't been chosen.
Very good. I must say, I do quite like a Battenberg. They're lovely checkerboard style. But which colours are in your Battenberg?
Well, this was one that I was not prepared for. I was going to go for the typical Mary Berry Battenberg, pink and yellow.
Are your colours different, Archie?
Well, I suppose I'd go for the classic kind of royal Battenberg of chocolate, kind of brown and yellow, which is well, they're both classics. So very good choice, I must say. We do approve here.
With lots of marzipan around the outside.
Maybe we should get some Battenberg in one week. That would be good. That would be good. Yes. So, although this isn't strictly related to the Empire, something did happen this week. So, we shall use this as our Empire theme music. Empire, Commonwealth theme music, which is, it's coming home. Well, that's from, obviously, we had a sterling performance in the Euros yesterday. So, yeah, here we are. And that is our Commonwealth theme music. Well, obviously... Wonderful. We're now talking about, is the Commonwealth still relevant? And it's not exactly the Commonwealth Games, it's the Euros, which is slightly different. So, yes, Jay, I know you're fascinated by the Commonwealth, so could you tell us, what is it?
I'm fascinated with the Empire, and I think the Commonwealth is a thing that's born out of the Empire, but not necessarily so connected as people say it is. There's a lot of people saying that it's a pseudo form of empire. I find this to be, I disagree. So if I may, can I talk a bit about empire and what the etymologies kind of lead into empire? Sure. So empire, kind of the first beginnings of empire come from the Latin imperatum, which basically means that a command or the right to give a command. In ancient Rome, an imperator which is conventionally translated as a general now, was kind of gave these commands, and then in the first Roman Empire, Augustus took the title of imperator, and he was basically a kind of commander of Rome. During his reign, there was this massive map of the territories of Rome put up in the Forum of the Senate, And over his reign, the term imperatum came to mean this territory, and then within that, then it kind of develops now into empire through kind of variations in French and German. But what I find really interesting, what we can learn about Rome, as in if we're going to kind of apply that to later modern empires, be that England and France, and then now even America and China, is that Rome has a metropole, that being Rome, and the peripheral regions, and that's what makes of an empire. So London is the peripheral region in the British Empire, and then the various other kind of Calcutta, New Wellington are these peripheral regions.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a good depiction of it, because the Commonwealth came really from the Empire. It was when the Empire collapsed. The British obviously wanted something as a remnant almost. That's what we could argue. To kind of live the memory and keep those connections between the former colonies, which I find quite interesting. So. And I had an interesting mentoring session recently with Mr. Karen from one of the schools here, who does actually listen to the podcast. So hello.
If you're listening, hope you're enjoying it.
It was about a kind of Commonwealth, and is it maybe still relevant today? Does it still have a function? But I'd say it's definitely that kind of new form of imperialism, arguably. But it doesn't actually seem to do very much. It seems to just sit there and provide a kind of basis for smaller nations to talk to bigger nations. Yeah.
I think it's an interesting thing, isn't it? I mean, there's not many things that come out of it, is there really? Apart from a lot of talks between nations, a lot of maybe support for other nations. But yeah, obviously you have the Commonwealth Games, which I suppose is that it shows that unity with the nations.
Well, we take part in that as the Isle of Man.
Yes. Yeah.
I find it hard to think of it as a new empire, because a lot of countries try and avoid the term empire now, and we want to move away from it. I don't think it is an empire. There's not one country controlling it, I don't think, and that's not what we want to pose. I think it's more kind of the phrase they use, I remember, is a harmonious family of nations.
I mean, it's like a progression of it's what the empire has become almost, in a way. It's evolution.
But I don't think within it there's any kind of imperial nature to it. It's more harmonious as opposed to a one ruler.
But obviously it came, so you have great interest in British India, as you said to me. So it did come. India's got a main component of the empire, and we had a big influence in India. Obviously from British India, we had the lovely diamonds came for the British crown jewels.
So India powered the entire Industrial Revolution in England, and capitalism as we know it from that today. It was the jewel in the British crown, yeah. Its worth cannot be. And what Britain did to India, I think, is a massive. So when we left India in 1947, the poverty rate was above 90%. 90% of the population were living below the poverty rate. There was a literary rate of 17% in 1947. We pillaged it to the ground, and we took what we needed to do the Industrial Revolution. Yeah.
But arguably, we could look at kind of the empire. I suppose this episode is all about Commonwealth and the empire. But we could look at the empire and say, well, yes, although it did kind of have those impacts and it did kind of reduce the positive date when they left, we then have seen a giant boom in recent years of India's power. Yes, there's still there's kind of big level of inequality between the different caste systems, but it's powered ahead, and I think it's definitely recovered almost.
Don't they have one of the best education systems? Don't they have quite a strong education system? Am I wrong there?
They have a lot of people, I can say. So they
my heed with that, Archie, is that do you know India's percentage of the world's economy is below 3% at this point? When in 1700, before the British arrived, it was at 23% of the world's economy. I think if we're going to say if the British didn't go, it wouldn't be as good as it is today. I think it would be far better than it is today. It was at 23% in 1700 before we arrived, and we pillaged it to the ground.
Well, yeah, of course. But it is looking, I suppose, we see the population of India will soon overtake China. It is, so it's yet to be its full power to be harnessed, really, I'd say. It has a lot of manpower, and it's interesting when we look at the former colonies. We have, obviously, I think, personally, I think there are benefits to the empire. We saw mass building of infrastructure. I suppose this is the common argument for British involvement in India. We saw obviously the railways, which still, I suppose, they're still legacies of the colonial era. They are still in India, but it's interesting. I would say it's recovered since, but then we obviously see the rise of Modi now, which I suppose is fascinating. I watched listened to a really interesting podcast on Modi. I do recommend if you have Audible and you want to buy it. It's excellent. It's Iron Men, sorry. And it's a fascinating story.
So that bit you said about railways, the reason we built railways was to transport our goods that we stole from India around India to get to the ports. There was no kind of philanthropic reason for that. I find it utterly confusing that people would say now that empires are good, especially in India, because I've explored how India was a kind of a rich geographical state full of vibrant culture and 23% of the world's economy, and then through British pillaging and kind of rampant theft, it left to kind of a poster child of world poverty. I don't really understand how we can posit as English people that, oh, well, we did leave railways that were half broken by the time we left.
Well, I suppose it's the two sides of the argument. We have, I suppose, I'm one of those who kind of maybe look at the British rule there, and we see, I personally see the economic developments, the legal kind of developments, and the administrative developments. But I do have to concede there are, obviously, we did go and kind of with the empires, and with all empires really, it is all of the kind of nations which is taken over. All the colonies are really sucked dry. It's like syringe has been put into them, and kind of blood has been taken almost.
I mean, you see from people their different stances where they look at more, like yourself, you look at more the economic point of view, whereas some people look at the more social point of view, and that's where people usually decide whether it's right or wrong.
I think I agree with Oliver there, and I think there's arguments to be made, some lesser, and some more. Like we can see economically that kind of it rampant pillages it. Socially, it destroys societies. I don't want to go in too much into it, but it's a very interesting idea, and I think whenever we talk about empire, we always have to talk about race. And this is always the kind of a thing. We need to bear in mind that we are three white men, and we're probably not the best people to talk about race.
No.
And moving that aside, empire had a deeply racially motivated what Rudyard Kipling defined as a white man's burden to kind of to look after these countries, and that's one thing that completely I don't understand. What does a white man have to do with kind of caring? But this was the thing. He said, we would go to India and we would care for the Indians. They didn't need our care. They were 23% of the world's economy. They had tax systems whilst Britain was during the plague. I think speaking about empire with such a tone of glory and pride can lead to kind of really racist conversations, because some people who've come to England have experienced it as have parents who have been part of the colonies and have terrible experiences under British oppression. And I think that's one thing that we really need to bear in mind when talking about empire.
Also, yes, there's obviously kind of the empire wasn't perfect by any means. It had many different advantages, but again, I am obviously quite more national. I'm relatively nationalistic, so I do have obviously my view is taken from maybe one side than the other. I do think it is interesting you mentioned kind of the racial aspect, because there was definitely in India in that time when Britain took over, it was very much we are the colonizer. We are kind of we need to show how it's done, which is quite. It is very ignorant of it, because there's a lot of kind of rich culture, especially within kind of we see the remnants of the Indian forts and all of kind of the Mughal Empire. You had these giant empires before Britain comes along, but obviously,
It's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting that you say that because so obviously Britain first arrived in India, or kind of officially around 1601 with the British East India Company, and all the way up to 1858 with the Indian Mutiny, that they ruled India as a private company. But this company was incredibly or relatively respectful to the Indian culture, and you would see lots of interracial marriages between East India Company workers and Indians in India. And then when the Indian Mutiny happened and the British Raj was established, this kind of wave of social Darwinism and racism came, and the very prospect of touching an Indian or inviting an Indian to dinner was completely kind of cast away. And also, as a conservative, actually, which I know you are, I wonder if I may ask you about Edmund Burke, the founder of modern day conservatism, who famously brought in Robert Clive and confronted him about his dealings in India. So lots of people, lots of conservatives didn't like the idea of painting the world pink, as the phrase was, because it was expensive, it took a lot of time, and even some, a very small amount at that time, thought it was bad morally.
No, I think there's obviously I think the private company did arguably do it a lot better than Britain, because once you start to involve a state, the state then does usually, especially if it's an imperialistic state at that time, taking over colonies, it does then tend to really create this hierarchy. And I suppose it's interesting you mentioned the East India Company, and they're kind of more respectful generally of the culture. Because it is that definitely need if you take it kind of business mindset, take it out of kind of India, you do need to work with what you have in effect. So you need to respect the culture, and you need to have that ability to work there. So it did make a lot of sense.
Sure. If I could just clarify, the East India Company wasn't a very, very good company. They were very, very corrupt. And as
but they were better than the future. So
nah, I think that's because of bribes, suborn and rule. They were very, very dark, and they stole a great deal from India. I don't think any involvement in India, any involvement at all in any dominions or colonies is good. And we definitely shouldn't praise the East India Company.
No. Yes, it's definitely not good. I know, but it was. I suppose all empires, in effect, I would have to say, are generally bad for the colonized nations. They only really benefit.
Would you argue then they're bad for all? They're bad for a colonized nation of people living there. Surely that means they're bad in general as a concept.
Well, I suppose in a concept, yes. We do need the kind of. It does work better to have more individual states rather than overarching bureaucracy taking over kind of the individual person's rights. I would agree there. They are generally bad as a concept to everyone but the nation state that formed the empire. Because the nation state that we saw form the empire, we saw this kind of within Britain. I suppose this is why Commonwealth does come in to kind of mitigate those effects and try and provide a kind of, not reparations, but a form of social afterwards. But they do, all the wealth does flow back to that original nation. So we saw kind of the giant gems which flowed back to Britain, all the ancient relics which sit in the British Museum today are all technically from the colonized nations. Yes, we see a wealth of lovely buildings in London, like the India Office for the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office now own it. Lovely, again, but yes, it was funded with bad proceeds.
I'm glad you determined a view, Archie, that you are an anti-imperialist.
Well, although my nationalist line says yes, we must go, as conservatives, it does prove very ineffective cost-wise, and in the modern day.
I think as a human being as well, there's a clear immorality of colonizing.
A moral empire would be my solution. A moral empire which you could have great economic strength and.
I think empires are by definition immoral. Pillaging a nation, going to a nation without their consent is immoral.
But could we argue we see kind of an evolution of empires, and we see kind of it's a nation state. We see kind of, you could take the EU for example. I'd argue that's a form of modern empire because it exerts great control over its nation states from Brussels. The EU bureaucrats. I think I can't remember whether you were a particular fan of the EU or not. But the EU bureaucrats do tend to take that mass control out of those nation states and around kind of centralise it in Brussels. So we do see, obviously, I think we were talking about America earlier, and their new form of imperialism. We saw that with their rush to gain all oil contracts. We saw that again with Britain trying to gain the oil contracts in the Middle
with Tony
East.
Blair, kind of the modern imperialist. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, was.
Oh no, it was just no. I was taking a breath.
China as well. If we're going to talk about modern empires. You're probably very familiar with this, Archie, being a scholar of African history. But China, under President Xi Jinping, have been taking an enormous amount of kind of economic advancements out of the deprived countries of China. Africa, I should say.
Oh yeah, indeed. It's through the Belt and Road Initiative. They go in and build these massive infrastructure projects in return for kind of that's loan, and then they gain like a entity, like maybe a port, and they get that for a certain lease, and then or they get that lease after. Then the country, then most likely because they are generally poorer and still developing nations, they then tend to default on that loan, and then China can then swoop in and gain even more assets. So it is definitely a modern. It's a modern form of imperialism. It's entirely very, very strategic. We see them take kind of key ports within these nations, and they build very, very good roads very, very quickly, but at a massive cost. Definitely. Yeah.
Wonderful.
But to loop back to kind of Commonwealth, we see, obviously we're talking about the downsides of the empire, which obviously were great. And yes, I still view there are upsides. However, more outweighed they are obviously by the downsides. There were, in my view, upsides to the empire, but we see the Commonwealth kind of, I suppose, come in. I'd say it's more philanthropical than the empire was, obviously, and it definitely in its early days was a lot more powerful than it is now. Now, I would argue it is almost useless in a certain way. There's still kind of it's lost most of its power, but on the upside, it has provided those kind of former colonies we see, like African nations, kind of that ability to lobby those major donors and diplomatic players like the UK, even India now and Canada. And as I'll quote from a former Ugandan foreign minister, the beauty of the Commonwealth is that member states feel they can approach each other when serious tensions arise between them.
Well, yeah, I think that's the idea of a Commonwealth, more of a say it again, a harmonious family of nations, as opposed to some kind of imperialist exploit. Also, when talking about empire, also I think it's very important. I don't know if you've read Santham Segara's Empire Land, which is this new best-selling book written by he's a graduate in English from Cambridge, but he's kind of a turned historian on empire, more thinking about empire conceptually. But he's talking about how we should be careful to talk about the goods and the bads of empire, more apply a bit more nuance to it, which I think is a very interesting way of looking at it.
It is interesting. I see. It is quite a divisive issue. Between, you have, I suppose, a new wave of historians is kind of more anti-empire, and we see the old wave is probably what we describe now as kind of quite patriotic and more set in like maybe the 60s view of the joys of the empires. We see quite a variety of academic texts and more stories coming out.
I think in the 60s there's a kind of enormous parallels being made between the Roman Empire and the British Empire. I mean, it was a massive empire, but it was 5 times the size of the Roman Empire, kind of 500 million people in it. It was an enormous empire.
Indeed. So yeah, I think overall, I must say America's new kind of imperialism, obviously is a major world power, and that has definitely come to rise. Especially, it was more so under Donald Trump. We saw kind of involvements less involvements in certain countries, but it was kind of more. It put America, I'd say, back at the forefront of the world. All the news networks found. Well, basically, I see he was quite funny, so he was definitely attracted to many. But America had giants, even under Obama, they've massive involvements, and Bush as well, within kind of the Iraq, Iran.
And also in South America, we can talk about Nixon,
indeed,
Reagan, and their assassination of the democratically elected leader of Chile, and throwing in of the vicious dictator Pinochet. It's a very, very interesting and very dark part of both these countries, especially America, which poses itself to be kind of the land of the free
and the leader of the free world, which I find really funny, because you can even draw parallels with, you look at the Cold War, and both Russia and kind of America were vying for more power within kind of the newly independent African countries. So
they were nations at that point,
and they were basically, the African nations would either go to the communists for funding, or they would go to the Americans for funding, and then regardless of which one, they would become almost like puppet governments. They were reliant on this foreign funding.
Pakistan as well. There was an enormous amount of that going on there following the partition.
I suppose the petition, I was reading about it early because we have a wonderful historical political figure of the week, thankfully chosen by Jay because he can pronounce the name.
Jawaharlal Nehru is the pronunciation, or just call him Jawahar or Pandit, as he was teacher in Sanskrit, Pandit.
Well, what you said. But anyway, I was reading about the partition because he's playing an interesting role within the leaderships. And obviously, when Britain finally decided to leave, it was under the Labour government of Attlee. They sent over a British cabinet delegation in the late 1940s, and to kind of assess kind of British India. And it was at that time definitely coming to the point where it was no longer viewed as the question of should India become independent, or should India become kind of split into obviously Pakistan and India as two nation states, or should it stay as one? That became more of the topic of conversation. Obviously now it's Pakistan and India, and I suppose for most of my life it's fascinating. I never really, until I read about it, not obviously recently, it was a few years ago, I never actually realised that Pakistan and India used to be the same nation under British India. I didn't realise that was their split. It's fascinating.
We've also, you've got Myanmar now, or Burma. That was part of India at one point as well. So it was a massive amount of land to rule. Extraordinary. I was going to give you a quick historical anecdote that I think you'll quite find funny from the partition. So once it was announced, and there was the leaders of these countries, Jawaharlal Nehru and the leader of Pakistan, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, they went on Indian national radio to announce to the country the partition. And Jawaharlal Nehru, who we'll talk about later, said his wonderfully eloquent speech. And then Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the leader of Pakistan, equally kind of educated man, a barrister, he ended he did all his brilliantly. And he ended with Pakistani Zindabad, which means long live Pakistan. However, in Urdu. However, the connection was really bad on the radio, so it came out as Pakistan's in the bag. And then the problem with that is that you had these all these Indian politicians in which got getting really angry at this guy's kind of false confidence in this, like Pakistan's in the bag, like completely professionalism. I found that quite funny.
That I must say that's a rather good anecdote. I suppose, luckily, hopefully we shouldn't have any misconstruing on our podcast from our faulty connections, although that would be rather interesting. Yeah, so it's utterly fascinating, kind of that era. I must say, I'm not particularly well versed in Indian politics. I've had a recent interest kind of reading about Modi, so I must say I shall. You've inspired me to read more about it.
I will recommend some books at the end.
Ah, brilliant. Yes, I suppose I'm my fascination. I'm sure I will rope you into doing an episode about this, Oliver, in a couple of weeks.
I'm not very well practiced on the subject either, as you can probably tell with my little contribution.
About Côte d'Ivoire shall be my topic in a couple of weeks, because and Southern Africa, so I find it absolutely fascinating.
Well, you could do the French Empire there. So
yes, the French Empire. So we should be back with more empire, the new PolitiBabble empire, as we should like to call it. Unfortunately, I suppose, is there any other comments so far?
On Empire, I could speak all day, Archie, but I know we're in a rush.
We're not in a rush. No, we have.
We've got other things to talk about, haven't we?
We have. Yes. Unfortunately, this week I had a very big lapse in judgment, and only remembered to put out the kind of the social media request if anyone had any comments on the Empire, Commonwealth or Empire Imperialism a couple of hours ago. So we haven't actually got the desk of our listeners. So we don't have the lovely coot theme there playing. But on the other hand, we do have an absolutely wonderful historical political figure of the week. Yeah, I won't bother pronouncing, so I'll leave you to introduce.
You can call him Nero at least.
Nero, there we are. Yes. Oh. Yes.
Can I go?
Indeed. Yes.
Okay. So Jawaharlal Nehru is an extraordinary figure in Indian politics, and I think in politics as a whole. So his name was Pandit Nehru, so like most people colloquially, and it basically means teacher. So he had a very interesting life in India. His dad, Motilal Nehru, was a famous Indian politician in the Indian National Congress, and he grew up in this Indian elite. He went to Harrow School, the famous public school in England, and it was kind of brushing shoulders with the great, very rich aristocrats of Britain, and the people who literally ruled over him, which I found quite interesting. He then went on to make extraordinary progress within the Indian National Congress, along with Mahatma Gandhi, and he was extraordinary with words. I'm just going to read. So he was the Prime Minister of India when they gained independence, and this is what he said on the midnight of the 15th of August 1947. Long ago we made a tryst with destiny, and now the time comes when we shall redeem our pledge, not wholly or in full measure, but substantially. At the stroke of the midnight hour, when the world sleeps, India will awake to freedom and life. I think it's an extraordinary way with words he has, and a wonderful politician.
Yeah, I agree. He was actually he's quite fascinating. I quite like his kind of within foreign affairs. We usually see most leaders now are very kind of weaving in and out, and even that era they were very kind of vying for power. But he was quite neutral in regards to international. Obviously,
because he was a socialist.
He was, yes. Not exactly my favourite form of political ideology.
He was damn socialist.
Yes, I agree. Ruining the world as usual.
Yeah, but that's where there's a fair democracy.
Exactly.
That's where there wouldn't be democracy without opposite opinions.
There wouldn't, no, unfortunately. But I must say it's fascinating because he was Prime Minister, then his daughter became Prime Minister, and then his grandson became Prime Minister after his daughter. So this is the
massive issue in India, yeah definitely, because Indian, this real, for a long while before, and then we had people like Narendra Modi come over, but there was a massive issue of the political elites in India, and Indira Gandhi is incredibly, I would urge anybody listening to read it. I'm doing my EPQ on Indira Gandhi. She is a fascinating figure, and I'm specialising in her in the democracy in India, because there's a massive issue of populism in her premiership in India. Very, very fascinating.
But it's really fascinating. I was only personally aware of kind of the links in, you see, African countries, and we see the likes of, let's say, Côte d'Ivoire is my specialty, and we see kind of Félix Houphouët-Boigny was kind of the first leader who ruled for 34 years, then died. Not left office, he died. But then you see the whole ruling class, even up until now, is all from politicians from the same era. So we see this even like here, I suppose, is looking at the kind of that level of, we know the family, they do good, we should keep them. That's very, very basic attitude. It's, if I probably totally wrong, but that is kind of a form of attitude there. I must say, thank you for putting it in as the political historical figure of the week, because I found him fascinating to read about. That was my research for this week, was basically spent reading about, I suppose, this wonderful this story.
I'm glad I made you do a bit of work on Indian history.
I know, yes. I must say, I've never done in my life very much Indian history, so it was rather interesting, I must say. Did you do any reading, Oliver? We're gonna see if Oliver did pay attention to our wonderful. But
I do remember earlier on in school, I don't know whether you ever covered it, Archie, but it did actually cover about the British Empire a little bit. I don't know whether you did that in.
We did, yes. Oh, we did actually do about Gandhi, but that was in about about 4 years ago, 5 years ago.
A lot of people did the Amritsar massacre as well.
Yeah, and then the salt thing where they banged the people over the heads.
1930,
Yes. So we do move on to, I suppose, Oliver's favourite part of the episode.
Yes, it's the Isle of Man news once again. So there's currently 59 cases on the Isle of Man, and nearly half of them are in school-aged children. Mark Cavendish is one stage away to equal the all-time record of Eddie Merckx's 34 stage wins, which will be absolutely fantastic. And on Tynwald Day, on was it Monday the 5th of July, Her Royal Highness the Princess Royal, Princess Anne, was present.
Yeah.
I have to say that Tynwald Day is the Manx National Day. It's a very proud day for the Isle of Man, since we do have the longest continuous parliament in the world. So,
and I'll do a big explain of what the Tynwald Day is, because I don't know if Jay knows much about it.
I actually, funny enough, the amount of political bubbles I've been watching, it appeared on my recommended on my YouTube, the live version of it. So
Excellent.
I was like,
yeah. So if anyone hasn't listened to that, as Jay's obviously done his good research there. If anyone hasn't listened to that, Tynwald Day is basically the national day of the island on the 5th of July. The better day rather than the 4th of July. We don't talk about that one. So where all the politicians here sit on a hill, and then the first deemster will read out, proclamate the laws, and if they're not read out within a year of their passing on Tynwald, on the hill, they cease to become law. That's how old school we are. It has to be read to become law here.
Very interesting.
And it's existed since I've forgotten the year. It's ridiculously long, like 900 AD or something.
Yeah.
1,100 and something years of history.
Oh, it's amazing. And obviously,
were you two present?
Sadly, one was not.
Sadly, one was not either. I do watch the live stream though as well.
Yes, I've watched live streams of it. Yeah.
But I don't know if the best time this year, obviously with the rise of our COVID in our community, was the best idea to go.
Especially us being young, unvaccinated people. So.
How's the weather been over there as well?
It was lovely on Tynwald Day. Lovely.
Yeah, it was lovely.
Up until just this evening when we were driving here. And it started spitting on the windscreen.
Yes, horribly grey and murky. But
it's the opposite over here, actually.
Yeah, but obviously, occasionally we do. I think the last time we did have royalty come
2008.
2008, and it was Princess Anne again. Princess Anne's like the most visited royal to the island because she's very interested in equestrian, and obviously equestrian's quite big on the island. And I think she does have a personal interest in the island anyway. So it's very the Manx people do get quite excited for a bit of royalty.
And then we get the opposite, where we have the Manx Republicans who are very like, oh, we don't need someone else coming over to preside over our ceremony here. I can't do a Manx accent. I do.
I wish I was over there. It sounds very exciting.
Yes, but. Regardless, we get a lieutenant governor who's the representative of the Queen to preside over it anyway, so it's still someone English, regardless.
Yes, and obviously, I'll just go backwards now. So, Mark Cavendish, who's a fantastic cyclist, is.
If you watch the Tour de France, I don't know if you do.
Yeah,
but there we go.
Yeah, if you know the Tour de France, you'll probably know Mark Cavendish as well, even if you're not on the Isle of Man.
I did watch the cardboard one.
Oh, where the person, that they got the lady
£100,000, something ridiculous.
Yeah, I did think she was in custody. Yeah,
but I think the fine was she was released without any charge. Actually, she might still be fined, but not that total amount. It's ridiculous.
It's silly. It happens all the time, and the cyclists get really annoyed. I would be.
I would be too.
Yeah, but Mark Cavendish, he's basically going to be the greatest cyclist of all time if he gets another stage win, and obviously, being a Manx boy born and bred. He's doing the nation very proud.
Indeed.
But obviously, on the downsides to some good news that we've had, there are 59 cases of coronavirus on the Isle of Man. I was actually looking at today. New Zealand has only had 27 deaths over the whole time.
They've been very good.
Very good. You know,
and they're much bigger than here. Here we've had about 26, 27.
Yeah, and they've only had less than 2,000 cases. So I'm just doing a quick comparison here to the Isle of Man. But 59 cases, and nearly half of them are in school-aged children. But it's only contained to 2 schools at the moment.
Well, Oliver, you could have it, I could have it, and we wouldn't know.
Yes.
Because our government has decided, I'm sure you do lateral flow testing where you are, Jay.
Yes, we do every Sunday and Wednesday.
Because here we have lateral flow testing availability now. The government's finally decided, yes, we will allow you to use lateral flow testing, but we can pick it up from school, but we can't pick it up. Our parents have to pick it up between, for like my school, 9:15 and 3:20. students aren't allowed to pick him up, even in sixth form, even above 16. No, you need a parent to come in. So we don't actually have testing of school children.
Has the mask rule got over to you yet? Are you still waiting for that?
No, there's no mask rule. No. So yeah, we have no mitigation within schools.
Yes.
They're packed, and half the COVID cases here are within schools.
And there's probably more than that, and we just don't know about them.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a massive issue with that. Yeah, especially this new variant, this Delta.
I know.
Yeah.
It'll be worse where you are, probably. I think with Boris Johnson announcing yesterday, Sajid Javid, announcing yesterday, there could be possibly 100,000 cases a day at the peak in summer.
Oh my gosh.
So, we don't envy you.
But the best thing is looking at the graphs, the hospitalizations and deaths have gone right down, which is good to hear. But the cases are coming higher and higher and higher.
Certainly don't envy you, Jay. So, yes, my sympathy is there. Yes,
well,
but
you go for walks in the wonderful rolling hills of Cheshire.
Oh, it does sound good. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, we move on to our UK news, which you might be more familiar with. Obviously, we saw yesterday a brilliant win from England in the Euros. A massive fire has actually broken out last week in an undersea gas pipeline which connects to the Zap oil field. I probably pronounced that horribly wrong. The National Rally Party in France re-elects Marine Le Pen without any opposition. And John Lewis has said it plans to build 10,000 homes for rent. The Evergreen, the ship which blocked the Suez Canal, has finally been released. And this is the most interesting of them all, is Vladimir Putin signed a law stipulating that sparkling wine sold as champagne must be produced in Russia. Which, yeah, that's quite shocking. But anyway, we go to the Euros, where, yeah, it was a fantastic result yesterday, I think. We actually made it to the finals since the first time since '96, if I'm correct.
And Italy.
With Italy, yes.
Wow. Well, Italy are and have been throughout this competition a very strong side, but clearly England have been as well.
Is it coming home though? That's that question we have to pose.
Of course, it's coming home, Archie. Of course, it's coming
home. We need the
home.
optimism.
How about you, Jay? Jay?
Yes, I think it is. What I found very interesting, as this is a political podcast, was the amount of what both Starmer and Johnson are doing to kind of win votes.
Oh yes.
Celebrating in a tent.
Yes, it was like Keir was saying, all businesses must let their staff go before like 2:00 in the afternoon to go watch the match and go to the pub. I found it hilarious.
Boris Johnson just kind of refused to rule out a bank holiday on Monday. So
they're politicising football, and we see. I must say my favourite part is when England wins a match, and you go on social media, and every single political account, regardless of sides, has England flag, like England is coming here, or like England team well, and it has the political logo on it, and it's quite interesting the amount they've drawn on football to gain political influence.
There was a shirt last night. There was Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, in an England shirt last night.
It's quite out of place.
Coming home. It's quite hilarious.
I meant to ask: does the Isle of Man have a football team?
We do.
We apparently do. Yes.
We do now. A newly established FC Isle of Man. We're entering the Northwest Division 1 or something. I don't know.
Yeah, not international.
We're not quite Euros yet, but you'll get there.
Yes, obviously let's say Everton are known as the Toffees, Arsenal are known as the Gunners, we're known as the Ravens. So. And
I have no idea what all of this is on about, because I only seem to watch the odd bit of international football. So there we go.
Yes.
We saw the massive fire break out. Those photos were all splashed across social media and the news earlier in the week. No, sorry, last week. For the Zap oil field, and I found my most interesting part of it, which I found most ironic, was it's under the sea. It's having this giant raging fireball. It's quite astounding pictures. And yet then they're deciding we'll spray with hose boats. We'll spray water on it because we can put the fire out even though it's already in water. Yeah.
Hilarious.
Very interesting.
I don't understand how the water just couldn't put it out anyway. I'd have to look at the pictures and probably.
Yeah, that did confuse me. But you might know, you might be more interested with Marine Le Pen in France. Yeah. That's fascinating. I must say, she's running against Macron in the presidential elections, along with obviously other parties. But it does show this rise of quite ethno-nationalism across Europe.
Ethno-nationalism is really interesting outside of Europe as well. China, Turkey, and India, off the top of my head, are a couple of countries that have quite ethno-nationalistic regimes. For an essay I did a while back on democracy, I looked at ethno-nationalism. Particularly kind of the populist lens of ethno-nationalism that we see with Modi, as we've already talked about, and also Turkey's president, and that's really fascinating. It's another kind of threat to liberal democracy, I think.
Well, it all tends to depend on kind of who do you prefer? Do you prefer Marine Le Pen or I think Macron? They're the ones I'd arguably the strongest chances of getting in. I find Macron a bit. Yeah, I'm not really a fan of Macron and his attitude. He's quite. I don't know how to describe him. He's an interesting character.
Yeah. I find it fascinating the amount of kind of glory presidents of France get because they're a kind of state figure. Like, have you seen that woman? Not the woman slapping Emmanuel Macron, the other one.
Oh, yes.
He was kind of crying over Emmanuel Macron, and I think it's like he to a lesser extent kind of holds the reputation like the Queen would as a figure of state. I find that quite interesting.
I know it's definitely fascinating considering we see kind of there's still Prime Minister of France, but in all the talks it's the president who goes to them, which I must say is fascinating. I find it a very interesting old system. And Champagne was obviously the last one. I read about it in looking at the news, and it's quite an odd law. It's saying that all sparkling wine sold as champagne must now be produced in Russia. I'm not sure exactly if that then excludes the champagne grown in the proper Champagne region of France.
Champagne.
Yeah. Champagne. It doesn't make sense, but I guess we'll see the impacts of it.
I don't think it will happen
as it comes. Yes, but I suppose we come to one of my usual favourite parts of the podcast. Unfortunately, Jay said he produced wonderful PowerPoints.
I think it's really annoying.
It's really annoying. So if you do send the slides over to you, we'll publish them on our social media accounts.
Yes.
For you. Yes, we'll put that. We'll do a special post for you.
Yeah. Scroll through whilst I'm watching them.
Right.
Actually, I could do first slide.
Yeah. So go over to our Facebook probably, and we'll probably stick them on our Instagram as well. Now, and you can go and find them and have a look through these slides when Jay sends them over. Right. So.
What a wonderful idea.
Yeah. So, it's the best part of the week, obviously, and Jay's going to talk to us about caricatures. So, yes, do go on.
Thank you, Frederick Chopin, for that introduction. Yeah, so I'll do first slide. So we can see, you're going to have to use your imagination here. We're going to have to, so caricatures began here, as you can see, as political satire, and then as separate cartoons, and then it kind of went on through the 20s. Next slide into magazines like Vanity Fair, where design became a lot more sleek and easy. Cubist inspired. Next slide, bright colours and geometric shapes. Then in the 1930s, it gained a lot more popularity, and we turned into World War II when it became caricatures a lot darker and a form of propaganda. And the cartoonist that I've linked there, Edward Syke, was a Polish American, and he's probably my famous. Now you can see within them there's kind of really racist imagery trying to kind of that propaganda. And then after the war, there was another wave of creativity with Gerald Scarfe, who kind of used repulsive, gory images of Margaret Thatcher and people like that. And then finally, Roger Law and Peter Flutkoff's Spitting Image, who are extraordinary. And
yes.
Kind of the new popular caricatures. So enjoy the images as much as you can.
Yeah. We were actually talking about the latest episode of Spitting Image the other week.
Which
Yeah,
Icon.
extraordinary.
It's such a brilliant show. Do go check it out. It's on. If you're in the UK, you can find it on YouTube for free.
You can
Sorry.
if you're in the Isle of
Oh,
Man.
sorry.
If you're in England, it doesn't allow you to.
Really?
Oh,
So-
Wow.
We must have been talking. I remember we were talking about this before about City Humans.
This is
I was
weird,
like,
'cause
you could just watch it
it's-
here. You were like, I can't.
Because the Isle of Man,
Yeah.
it's always the Isle of Man that can't access things, not the other way around.
Back superiority
Yes,
here.
but,
Back superiority.
but I do. Political satire is one of my most favourite things to look at or watch. Yeah, no, it's great. Yeah.
There was a brilliant BBC Radio 4 one, probably about a year ago. I only listened to it on repeat because it went out usually 11 o'clock at night. But it was about Boris Johnson, and the reporter went to speak to Boris Johnson about whiff waff. I think it's in relation to his whiff waff speech. It was all about how Boris was going to the end of his age and he's time traveling. And he was on his deathbed and he's talking about whiff waff, and we should play another game of whiff waff, which I found very fascinating.
If you're on the Isle of Man and a bit of sort of political satire, you can go and
I Am
look
One.
at
Is it I Am One?
I Am One,
I Am One
which is
on Max
produced by
Radio.
Max Radio,
Yep.
and also Takeover TV. They
yes.
produce some good Manx local satire. It's great.
Yes. But I must say what's fascinating about caricatures, Jay. Thank you very much. And I can't wait till I can go and see those slides. So when they're pinged over, they shall be posted on our Facebook and Instagram, so you can go and view them and browse them at your leisure. So we do come to, I suppose, another interesting part of the episode, which is our recommendations. So we recommend to you each week something to read, something to watch, and something to listen. So, Jay, what are your recommendations to watch, read, and listen this week?
Okay. I read a lot, so good luck. If you're interested in Empire, I would. There's a couple of ways of approaching it. If you want to look statistically and economically, a real good book into that is Shashi Tharoor's Inglorious Empire. If it gets a bit boring, skip the first chapter and it gets better later on. If you want to, I do Empire as how it actually run day to day. I think John Darwin's Unfinished Empire is a very good book on that. And then conceptually, as a British person, how should we judge Empire? I think Empire Land by Sampam Segara is a very, very, very good book. And also, if you want to look at East India Company, William Dalrymple is probably the guy to look at, the historian to look at. And also, if you're going to look at politician, like Charlie was talking about, amazing book called Indian Summer by Alex von Tusselman. And it's all about that one summer of Indian independence and how frantic it was to rush towards the end. Listening, there's a very, very good YouTuber called Tom Nicholas who's doing a PhD, and he makes these really, really good, concise videos like the myth of. I watched another one called the myth of free press, and what Jordan Peterson, and another one is what Jordan Peterson misunderstands about Orwell. I mean, Orwell's a really amazing writer and probably the most misunderstood writer. So that's what I recommend. And what was the other one? Watching. I've been trying to make my way through all the kind of classics. So Shawshank Redemption is a very, very good film. As is Clockwork Orange, but that's quite gory. But there you go, that's all from me.
Oliver, how about you?
Well, obviously, I've actually gone for the same view with the watching, because I was watching a good show the other day, but I thought, oh yes, we'll go on to the Euros. Obviously, I'll be watching on Sunday evening at 8 p.m. England versus Italy in the final of the Euros. And listening-wise, a sort of a sister, brother, cousin podcast, you could say, as they do record and publish here via Manx Radio, is the Manx Theatre podcast. It's very interesting. It's they've recorded and interviewed some of the people that I've done shows with, so I find it interesting to know a bit more about them and where they've come from. Because if you don't know me, I do a lot of theatre and acting sort of stuff, so it really interests me because you get to find out about sort of people's how they've come into it, what they've done previously. Obviously, I'm only very young. Obviously, some people have been doing it for a long time, so I find it really interesting. And you get to find out lots of information and facts about it all. So yeah.
It does sound interesting.
Listening.
Oh yeah.
I forgot about listening. I would just say
yes.
The Brazilian guitarist Joao Gilberto is an amazing jazz guitarist, isn't him? That's me done.
There you are. Yes.
Archie, your recommendations?
Well, mine are reading. I'm dipping in and out of a fascinating book at the moment of many thought problems and philosophical problems, called "The Pig That Wants to Be Eaten" and 99 other thought problems or something along those lines. It's a Pig That Wants to Be Eaten. It's a fascinating book. I do highly recommend. It's very full of brain teasers. Very good. Very big philosophical questions posed. Watching, I will echo Oliver's comments and say definitely the Euros on Saturday, not Saturday, Sunday, is definitely recommendations there. Fingers crossed it will come home. And then listening, apart from our wonderful kind of sister podcast, which is Acta Populi as well.
Thank you very much.
Do go check us out on YouTube and then also Spotify and all your favourite podcast providers, I suppose. Do recommend checking out. I am actually on the monarchy episode, so yes, that's my highlighted one out there.
There's a good one on communism as well.
On communism as well. That was very interesting to watch, I must say. And then also, if you do get a chance, you might be wondering where our guest music comes from. It is Frederick Chopin's Minute Waltz, which is also used on BBC Radio 4's Just a Minute, where that is an utterly brilliant radio show. It's like on the car. Oh, excellent to listen to. Very enjoyable. Yes, so
that sort of concludes us for this week. So thanks very much, Jay, for coming on. It's been interesting doing it via this sort of technology. We can speak to people in foreign lands now, which is great.
Foreign lands.
Yeah, great to establish the how it's going to work.
The ability.
So it seems to work very well.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and also if you'd like to be a guest on PolitiBabble, please do get in touch. We like to hear from people with a wide range of views.
And we'll try and fit you in. So, any last comments, Jay?
I just think there is. I think if you're gonna look about empire and anything really, just read literature and read the books, and then make an informed decision from that.
Indeed. Don't listen to me, Mr. Ryan, I can assure you. Jay, much more well-read in this aspect.
No, don't listen to me. Read your own and work out your own decisions. I would say.
Yes. Make your own mind up is the key theme from here. So yes, that concludes the brilliant podcast that is PolitiBabble for this week. You can join us next time for a discussion about youth involvement in politics. Leave a like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more. As usual, you can find the podcast versions of your favourite podcast providers, and get in touch at PolitiBabble on all forms of social media to let us hear your views.
You've been PolitiBabbled.